This happens. Okay, we are going to get started soon. Do I sound okay, Tavis? Am I good? Oh, there we Now I can hear myself. Oh, that's terrifying. Welcome to Is God a Vindictive Bully? And this is week 4. So I'm going to be entirely honest. I really struggle to start these things. I'm terrible at starting most things. So I was doing some research into how do you start things, and they all say that you should do something that you're really comfortable with. So I came up with this silly idea. If you know anything about me, I know a lot of really weird and random things. My dad actually calls me the keeper of odd knowledge. And so I'm like, I can start with a little fun fact. And I was going through stuff, and I'm like, what's a little fun fact? And I was juggling between two. I was thinking I could do something silly, like, the fact that William Shakespeare's grave doesn't have a skull. But I decided to do something kind of more topical. So I'd like to introduce you to this random man. His name is James Richardson. He is dead. He was was a British explorer during the time, about 1800s, early 1800s. I think he was born in 1809. But he was, in kind of the topical sense, he was a avid abolitionist. He was an evangelical and an avid abolitionist. So he would go around, and he had this great idea. He was going to go to places, and he was going to tell them that you shouldn't have slaves, because that's really not great. So he started societies in different places, and he tried to encourage people to free their slaves and also follow Christianity. And one of those places was Morocco. So he gets to Morocco, he starts working there, and the governor of Morocco wrote a letter to Richardson, and there's this quote from this letter that I find very interesting. Here's the quote. The mission of Richardson is against our religion. He's Muslim, by the way. I cannot entertain it, think of it, or interfere with it in any way whatsoever. The purchase and sale of slaves was authorized by the prophet himself. Which is very true. This is actually a very true statement. Muhammad condoned slavery, and he said you should buy and own slaves if you have the money, so then you don't have to work yourself. But I find this interesting where we kind of talk about, slavery in the Old Testament. We also have to kind of think, if you think about it in other religions, it's never seen as bad or restrained. And I always find that interesting when you kind of look at the Muslim perspective. And it's why until I think it was the last Muslim country to abolish slavery was 1982. So very, very recently. So, but with that said, with a little fun fact out of the way, we are going to continue our talks of slavery. So, last time we looked at this verse, and actually at the end of class, I was talking to Mr. Tompkins, and he made a really good point that I forgot to point out, is that this Exodus passage here is only in relation to Hebrews, right? So it starts off where if you buy a Hebrew slave, servant, they call it a servant, but it's the same thing. You can translate it as slave or servant. Then, so this whole thing here about where it talks about he's only works for you for 6 years, and then he goes free, but unless if he loves his master and he wants to stay with them. Whereas, I thought these were going to come up. This one here, I'm going to just bring the whole thing up. This is general here, where this is according to any slave here. And that's why a lot of times they translate it slave, where it's the more broader sense where it covers slaves and servants, right? So the Hebrew slaves were called servants, and the slaves of everyone was the slaves for that. So if you beat your slave, if you don't remember, if you beat your slave, they are set free with what they are set free. If you kill your slave, then you are also executed. So again, I like to find this funny when you think of the transatlantic slave trade and how often they beat their slaves. If you use biblical principles, you would have to free your slaves. Of course, that didn't happen here because, fun fact, most slaveholders in the South were actually atheists. So here is another thing, kind of what I was going on to if you apply biblical principles. And I kind of vaguely mentioned it, but I don't think we talked about it. But here are two verses where we're talking about kidnapping of people. So anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or still in the kidnapper's possession. So that's the Exodus passage. And then the Deuteronomy passage is, if someone is caught kidnapping a fellow Israelite and treating or selling them as a slave, the kidnapper must die. You must purge the evil from among you. So this first one is actually for anyone, right? The someone here is general. So if you even kidnap someone who is not an Israelite. The second one is more focused on the Israelites because they're talking about, because this is supposed to be in the land, where this is outside of the land. So again, another thing where I was talking about, if you apply biblical principles, we would have to have a lot of executions in the antebellum South. But I find this really interesting because, a lot of times when we think of slaves, we think that they are kidnapped people, where in the in Israel, which they were at the time, the other nations, they were kidnapping people and having them in slavery or other such things like that, where in this, it was a more consensual relationship where it's more similar to you have a contract where you will work for me for a certain period of time for whatever benefits that may be. Like if you say had a large debt and you wanted someone, you needed help paying it off, that would be for. So now we shall continue with this. Can I have you all turn to Leviticus 19, please? And if I could get a volunteer, that would be great. If not, then I'll pick on my dad. Oh, Luke, you want to volunteer? Cool.
Now, if a man lies carnally with a woman who is a slave acquired for another man, but who has in no way been redeemed nor given her freedom, there shall be punishment. They shall not, however, be put to death, because she was not free. He shall bring his guilt offering to the Lord, to the doorway of the tent of meeting, a ram for the guilt offering. The priest shall also make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering for the Lord, for his sin which he has committed, and the sin which he has committed will be forgiven.
Okay, I know how to pick great verses, don't I? So we are talking about a man sleeping with a female slave that was promised to be married. In some actual translation, or sometimes I see it as it could be any female slave that, even if they weren't promised to be married, but it's kind of a little bit ambiguous, because if you remember a few verses back when they talked about female slaves were different in the sense of they were bought kind of as more like a dowry, and they would be bought as a wife for either the person who bought them or for their children or for their other slaves. So that's why there's this ambiguity here, because the female slaves are like that in the sense of, they are purposely bought for marriage, right? And then he who has not been ransomed, that's another thing where we were talking about how women had the right to be redeemed by their family, if their husband was a horrible person, or prior to that if they didn't like that. But a lot of people get a little bit weird about this, which I can kind of see. It's not a verse that's on the surface is very conducive for great discussions. But there's a lot here that I think we need to put out. So a lot of times people get really don't understand why the man who sleeps with this woman is not put to death. This part right here, yet they are not to be put to death. And so at the time, this is kind of a cultural thing. The woman, if she was, back then women were, sleeping with someone was a very precious thing for them, and they were very careful and guarded their virginity. And so this man is violating that. He's sinning against her in that way. But if you did it in a sense where if you raped a woman in a different way, you would be put to death and you would be executed. In this sense here, the reason he's not put to death is because this woman will now be wedded to him as his wife, and he's responsible for taking care of her, right? So that's why they don't kill him, because often it was really hard for a woman who wasn't a virgin to get married, and unmarried women really struggled back in the day to provide for themselves, right? Because it was an agrarian culture, right? It was a lot of hard work, a lot of long days and labor outside. So it's hard for a woman to do that and compete with men. And that's why often you see where also you have the protections of women, where, if you dropped a sheaf of wheat, you couldn't pick it back up because that was for the women, like the widows and stuff, right? Because it was a hard society. So, and working in the fields like that would be hard. So what we're doing here is basically we are making the man her husband, and then he is responsible for all the things. And there's many punishments if he doesn't. If he doesn't provide for her, there are many punishments in the law that they would could punish them, or she would be able to go free in that sense. I really tried to see, and I don't know if maybe Gary wants to try this. If a man sleeps with a female slave, I could not find. I leaned towards it not being consensual. That was what I was picking up, but I could not find anything that says. So this is, in my opinion, I think he is raping this woman. Do you want to say anything to that, Gary? Or?
It's really hard to say, but
yeah.
It really is not enough information to know.
That's what I was kind of picking up. It was kind of vague. This is a horrible sin. But what they're trying to do here is protect this woman, because this did unfortunately happen, and where she would become his wife, and then the man is responsible, and he would have to also make himself right with the Lord prior to this being able to marry them. That's why you have this whole second part where they talk about he has to go to the priest and make the guilt offering to get his sins forgiven. Right? So he has to be right with the Lord also, because that's really what's really important here is before that he can take care of his wife, he has to be right with the Lord. So, any questions? Yes, Mr. Foster.
Comment. I noticed the pronoun change says, yet they are not to be put to death. The they, is that referring to the man or the man and the slave?
That is the one ambiguity where it is. That was the one thing where you are right. This they there that's the one where they think it might have been a consensual thing, right? So yes, that does say they there. But I'm not. That's the one part where it says, because the rest of the verse it focuses on the man, it's talking about the man's sin here, right? So it holds the man as the accountable party. So again, I'm not sure on that. That's the one I did see some people kind of talk about that as the ambiguity here. But generally speaking, it talks about the man sleeps with a female slave. Again, it's putting the onus of the sin on the man. So that's why they think of it in that way. But yes, good point. Any other questions? Cool. So we shall now move on to more slavery passages. So, if you can turn to Leviticus 25, specifically 39 and 43, we're going to talk more about slavery. So, very fun, exciting things. And if I could get a volunteer to read, that would be excellent. Connor, awesome.
If a brother of yours becomes so poor with regard to you that he sells himself to you, you shall not subject him to a slave service. He shall be with you as a hired man, as if he were a foreign resident. He shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. He shall then go out from you, he and his sons with him, and shall return to his family, that he may return to the possession of the land of his fathers. For they are my slaves, whom I brought out from the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold in a slave sale. You shall not have dominion over him with brutality, but you shall fear your God.
Okay, so we're kind of doing a whole overview of all of slavery, or verses about Old Testament slavery in there. And here's another thing where emphasizes that your fellow Israelites are not to be your permanent slaves. You have until the year of Jubilee, and then they are freed, unless if they choose to stay with you. And there's a big part here where it talks about they go, I think in Connor's translation, it says their father's land, and here it says their own clans. They're very big on keeping that lineage. You have your father's land, you stayed in your, your father's clan. So they're really big on the clans. But here it's talking about how while they may be your slave, they are still their own individual person, right? And then again, banning any sold as slaves. So this part here is basically, again, the part where you cannot sell fellow Israelites to foreigners. You may own them as slaves, and you can sell them to another Israelite, but they need to stay in the land because the land is very important to the Jewish people, right? Good? Okay. Now, let's go a few verses later with 44 through 46. I guess that's just the continuation of what Connor read. Can I get another volunteer to read? Anyone? Nope. Bethany.
As for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one man over another.
Okay. Fun verse. So now we're going into what I was talking about earlier, is they were allowed to have slaves from other nations, right? As you see here. And when it says you may bequeath them onto your children, is basically the idea they are not freed during the year of Jubilee. And it talks about where you can get them from other countries, or if someone is traveling through your land. And I think this is where, you have to remember, they are buying these slaves. They are still under the protections of the other Israelites. You can't beat them, you can't murder them, and they can't be kidnapped. That's the other thing, is that you had to verify before you could buy a slave that these people were not kidnapped, and they were pulled out of their land in that way. They were more often than not were probably people that were indebted and they couldn't pay off their debts, and so they were sold into slavery. That was very common practice at the time. So as you can see here, they can own those slaves, but I'm just going to be entirely honest. If I was a slave in the old time, I'd want to be bought by an Israelite because you couldn't be beat to death. Not just me saying something. I mean, no one would want to be a slave. But as you can see here, they were allowed to own slaves from other nations. So, and yes, Mr. Tompkins.
Is the term property the same as we talked about before as investment?
Yes, it is. It is. So, if you remember back a few verses ago, we talked about how it says slaves are your property. It sometimes can be translated as investment, right? And so it's this kind of weird thing where, yes, it is again, you're inheriting an investment, right? You would make money off of their labor, and so that's that type of investment. It's the same way if you beat your slave, they were set free, and you lost that investment in that sense. So, cool. Anyone else? Okay. So let's now, I think we are done with Leviticus, so let's move on to Deuteronomy. Very fun stuff. So Deuteronomy 10:15. If I could get another volunteer. I'm making you all read today. This is nice. Mr. Tompkins?
When you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If it agrees to make peace with you and open to you, then all the people who are found in that shall become your forced labor and shall serve you. However, if it does not make peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. When the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall strike all the men in it with the edge of the sword. Only the women and the children and the animals and all that is in the city, all its spoils, you shall take as booty for yourself, and you shall use the spoils of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not of the cities of the nations nearby.
Okay. So we will come back and revisit this verse when we talk about genocide. But because it talks about, again, killing all the men in the city. But a few things we want to point out is they're talking about attacking a city that is far away, right? You get that where they talk about you march on a city, right? That's talking about it's not in the land, it's outside of the land, right? And they have to march to go there. And it says a distance from you. So why is this in slavery? Is because what a lot of people see here is this first part where they say they make an offering. So basically you march on the city and you say, hey, we're going to conquer you. And they say, no, we want peace. And a lot of people get where they think it's slavery is forced labor. There we go. Subject to forced labor and shall work for you, right? That part there. But we need to talk about some customs of ancient people at the time that this was what was happening here. Does anyone know what how many people know what a tribute kingdom is? Okay, we got a handful of people. A tribute kingdom is basically, this was common up until the Middle Ages, is basically if you were a power, like a great power, you would go to different nations and you would say, I'm not going to conquer you, but you have to pay me a yearly tribute, right? But if you go against me, I will wipe you out. And so that's what it's talking about here. So you can see this. Israel was actually a tribute kingdom for a lot of times for, I think it was the Assyrians and the Babylonians, right? And then they stopped paying the tribute, and then they came in, got wiped out. But that's what it's talking about here. You go to the city, right? It's the forced labor there means they're paying you a tribute of what you set. It's not actually talking about you take everyone, you put them into slavery, and then they work for you like that, right? That's not the context here. It's talking about how this is a faraway nation that you go to and you say, we're going to conquer you. And they respond with, okay, we want peace, right? We want to have peace with you. We will pay your yearly tributes. And then they had that freedom like other cities do. So that was very common in the ancient world. I say ancient world, it was common up until medieval ages, right? That was kind of a lot of what when the European nations went out and conquered places, they were kind of trying to set up similar, like what's like tribute kingdoms there, except they were kind of different. It's not in the same sense as this. But that's what they're talking about here when they talk about the forced labor, right? So it's not slavery. Even though a lot of people tend to read it that way because it can lean that way if you don't know that type of what happens in that culture. So again, we will come back and revisit this because with the genocide passage, yes, Dad.
Plunder.
Yeah.
So they didn't do what they were supposed to do, so they annihilated all the men, and the women and children became plunder.
Yes.
Did that mean they become slaves?
They would become slaves, but in the sense of the female slaves of where you can then marry them to your sons and daughters or sons and daughters. Wow, that's bad. Sorry. You can marry them to your sons. That was a bad slip. Okay. So, yes.
They didn't have female slaves like they had in America.
No. So if here, can I go back for a second? Oh, this is going to be a giant block of text. I'm sorry. So they talk about female slaves here, in where, oh gosh, okay.
Up there, third line, fourth line.
If a man sells his daughter as a servant, right? And that was the general practice here. So this would also be for foreign slaves, but they didn't have the right for redemption by the family. That's the difference with this. So female slaves were not like how they were in the South. They were kind of as seen as, potential wives or
So who did housework?
the wives and the daughters.
So what you see on TV is completely wrong.
For Israel or for other
Well,
nations?
like even in Egypt, you had women running around in houses doing stuff.
That happened in Egypt. Yes, there would be people who would buy female slaves, and they would have them do housework, but they were also kept for other reasons. Yes.
Like, the Hebrews had the specific command that they were not supposed to marry foreign women.
We will get to that. I actually have can you hold on for a second? Okay. I have a verse about that. We'll talk about that. But you are right. So, yes, Luke.
Another one that I was thinking of, kind of similar to that.
Mhm.
Didn't we just say that the Israelites couldn't take foreign slaves?
They could take foreign slaves?
Couldn't.
No, they could. That's what this verse is saying here. Wait, hold on. Yeah, you can, male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you, right? They could take slaves from foreign nations.
They were allowed to.
Yeah.
But not in kidnapping?
They couldn't kidnap them. Yeah. So you could not own a slave that was kidnapped, right? So the slaves that they could get were either plunder of war, right, and what we just saw, or people that were often sold into debt, right? That was the common thing there.
All right. Just making sure there's no contradiction.
No, yeah. No, they could take slaves from foreign nations. Okay, so let's get to Bethany's question. Can I have you all go to Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 14? And then could I get someone to read, and then we will expand on Bethany's question. I guess I just put it up there, so. Any volunteers?
I just read that.
21, I thought you read 20, oh, okay, hold on, okay. Where are we? Thank you. Okay, Numbers, okay. I don't know where we are. Okay, yes, this is what you read, right, Mr. Tompkins? Okay, so can I have you go to 21, 10 through 14? It's very similar. That's why it's so confusing. So 21, 10 through 14. Okay. Brent, thank you.
If you go out to battle against your enemies, and Yahweh your God gives them over into your hands, and you take them away captive, and see among the captives a beautiful woman, and set your affection on her, and would take her as a wife for yourself, then you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and trim her nails. She shall also remove the clothes of her captivity, and shall remain in your house, and weep for her father and mother a full month. And after that, you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. And it will be that, if you do not desire her, then you shall let her go wherever she wishes. But you shall certainly not sell her for money. You shall not mistreat her, because you have humbled her.
Okay. So, Bethany, you are right. They were not supposed to marry foreign women. It happened all the time, right? There's many times you can see that in the Old Testament. And so the Lord, knowing that this would happen, even though that they were not supposed to do this, he set up barriers around it, right? It's like, if you imagine it, God doesn't want us to divorce. I mean, God says he hates divorce, right? That's like my go-to verse there. But he sets up barriers around it to protect the people involved because he knows that this will happen, right? So, does that kind of semi-answer your question in regards to the you shall not marry foreign women, right? Because they will, I mean, if you look at Solomon, he married a ton of foreign women and they led him into adultery, right? Can't say that word. Idolatry, not adultery. Well, he probably did that also. Okay. So, I am a little bit scatterbrained today. Okay, so they're talking about you conquer a city, right? And that's kind of in relation to the past verse. They conquer a city. They killed all the men, which we'll get to in the genocide section. I want to do a little bit of setup before we start talking about that. And then you want to take this woman, right? So the big thing here I really always like to point out is she is not treated as a slave, right? This sense, she's not as just something that you can just take and make her your wife and then you throw her out because you get bored with her, right? This is not sex slavery. That's what happens in sex slavery. That's not what's happening here. God elevates this woman who's a foreign person, and he makes her, you have to treat her as a wife, right? You do not treat her as just this expendable thing here. And that's also why they have this part here where she shaves her head, she trims her nails, she puts away her clothes she was captured with. What he's trying to do, what's trying to happen here, is they are taking this woman out of a culture where they were idolaters, and they're bringing them into the Israelite culture, so she needs to remove herself from that culture, right? So often, hair and nails were very symbolic for the type of culture you were in, and like how you did your hair and how you painted, like did your nails and stuff like that would like be ways that they would actually worship their idols, right? And it's very symbolic to them. So that basically, in their clothes also, right? You know, they had the vestments of their idols and stuff like that. So what they're doing here is they're putting that all away, right? And then she gets a month to mourn her father and her mother, right? So this is not something that just happens like, willy-nilly, right? This man has to be dedicated to this to marry this woman. And then he marries her, right? And then they are husband and wife, right? So it's basically trying to cleanse the woman of her pagan roots, right? That's what's kind of happening here with the cleaning themselves, like, cutting their hair, trimming their nails and all that stuff. And then try to basically treat her as a full wife, right? Any questions? Yes, Dad.
Shave her head, to me that sounds like all her hair is gone.
Yeah, they would shave off all her head. But
That would have been a horrible thing.
yes.
I mean, I don't get it.
So, okay. So I'm trying to think of a place that still does this to this day, and I'm kind of failing. I think in India, they often put like beads and stuff in their hair, right? Okay, I'm going to go with Norse. I know the Norse decently well. So the Norse would braid their hair, right? And in their hair, they would put like either beads with runes carved in them, or like little mementos, like bones from kills they had, sometimes human bones, right? And they would weave that into their braid, right? This happened with both men and women, right? And so that is basically what it's basically idolatry, right? They have runes that give them like protective magic. They would have stuff like they would have the name of Odin written in there or stuff like that. So it's idolatry. So they would shave their hair, right? I mean, of course, the Norse did not exist at the same time, but that is a practice that is that comes to the top of my head. So if that hypothetically happened, they would shave their hair, right? Get rid of all the pagan stuff that would be part of that, right? And they would have to basically grow their hair back. I mean, they had a month right before, while they were mourning, right? And it's basically to try to remove all of the pagan and idol stuff that was on them. Yes.
I get that part.
Okay.
What I don't get
Okay.
is how any female would want to become the wife of somebody that did that to them. I just don't get it. I mean, how do you emotionally ever get to the point you want to be with somebody like that? I mean, I don't get it.
Especially when God condemns it.
Yeah.
I mean,
It doesn't talk about the emotional aspect here.
in today's world, this is like.
Yes, but you're thinking of it in today's world, right? So you have to think that she is a woman whose city has been destroyed.
It's better being dead.
Yes.
That's the alternative, right?
Yeah. But like you have to think about it. This woman, her city's destroyed. I do agree. It is hard for us modern people to do. And again, it's like, so her city has been destroyed, right? Her father's probably dead, right? They would kill all the men. Her brothers are probably dead. And so basically, it's a way of protecting her, right? So she becomes a full wife because what this is here for, in my opinion. Gary, of course, can make what his opinion on is it also. But what I see here is this is to prevent sex slavery, right? So you just conquer land, you see a beautiful woman, you sleep with her, and then you throw her away, right? Because that's obviously,
I get that.
yes. And it's also to protect the woman that they would take as plunder, right? So these women would be taken, right, as we saw in the previous verse, and they could be wed to different people. And this is a way to protect them of that, where they aren't second-class wives or they're just sex slaves or stuff like that. They are full wives in that sense. Is that good?
That's helpful.
I saw Brent, and then I saw... Okay, so let's do Brent, and then... Okay.
Yeah, to me, I see God's common grace at work here.
Yeah.
Because this is a woman that is not part of the nation of Israel, and we have a loving, compassionate God that is saving this woman from a terrible act because of men's sin.
Yes.
And he is protecting this woman regardless of what she has to go through with it. And so that's what I see in this passage. This is God's common grace to someone that's outside of the nation of Israel.
Yeah, and it applies protections against them, right? And you see this in ancient, I say ancient times, but again, it happened until the Middle Ages, right? Not that far away, where people would conquer cities and they would kill all the men and then they would have giant orgies with all the women, right? So that, breaks that there because, you cannot do that in this sense. It goes against that, but that's what, our sinful natures lead us to do, right? So, Mrs. Cantrell. Okay. Connor.
No, we can talk about it later.
Okay, back there.
So where is God's grace? I'm less concerned about the shaving of the head, but the one where you said it was likely not consensual. The verse where then his punishment is to marry her.
Okay.
So,
So,
if it's not consensual, and now I am tied to this man forever, and potentially this is happening over and over, where is the
so,
grace for this woman?
so the protection for the woman is that the man has clearly defined laws where he has to protect her, right? And if he doesn't do so, the law will go against that person. Like the judges can come and say, you are not treating your wife well, right? And so that's where that kind of comes in there, is where, am I on the right verse? I am, sorry. She basically has the protection of her husband, and that, because if you think about it, so in today's society, right, we would never do this, right? And it's because a woman has more protections and more capabilities of providing for herself and protecting herself by herself, like that, right? During this time, your husband was your protector, right? He was the person who was supposed to look out for you, to provide for you, to feed you, and all that stuff, because it was a very hard society. A woman like this, right, who was raped, would really struggle to find a husband, if at all, right? Because they were the common people, the people at the time valued virginity, right? And they did not want to marry a woman who has slept with another man, right? That's not prohibited in the Bible, right? That's not saying the Bible says that, you couldn't do that. But what it's doing here is it's trying to protect the woman, where it gives her husband a way of having food and things provided for her, and a way of protecting her. And I don't know if this is in here. Okay, so I talked about how she would become his husband. She did have a choice in that sense. She could say no, and we've seen that where there's been people who are raped and they stay in their father's household, right, where the father would protect for them. But in this sense is if that is what they want to go forward with, they could. That's a way of protecting. Does that help, or am I just blabbering in 30 different directions, right? So it's all about trying to have a way for that woman to be provided for, because that was really important at the time. So I saw Connor and then Dad.
I wasn't gonna say it at first, but I think now is maybe a good time to interject. But
I appreciate that.
It almost seems like, and this could be just completely my conjecture, that it's not even just about the infrastructure of the law providing for the woman, but almost shaping the man to become a loving husband to this woman.
Yes.
Like, in a lot of ways, it's a checks and balance against male infatuation. You are not going to be marrying this woman because of her haircut or her pretty nails or her foreign clothing. You are going to be marrying this woman as a captive. This woman is going to be completely bereft of whatever it is that you saw in her when you took her.
Yeah.
You are now taking care of something tender and humiliated.
Yeah. Okay. Dad?
The problem is that it just doesn't fit Hallmark movies.
That is very true. It does not fit Hallmark movies. I don't think a Hallmark movie doing this would do very well. So I saw Luke and then Mr. Tompkins. Luke.
This just seems a little shaky to me, because first of all, this is probably being done here just because she's pretty, not because of like anything else of substance. And two, it also comes back to God. Didn't God like forbid the Israelites take wives outside their country?
Yes, but it doesn't mean that they didn't do it, right? There's lots of things that are forbidden that they still did. I mean, if you look at Solomon, I mean, he took many foreign wives and...
He still shouldn't do it.
Yeah. So I think what we're doing here is we think that this is... Okay, so I think I can kind of get... Okay. So there are many laws that in the Old Testament, God does not want... Okay, I'm going to say something radical. God does not want you to rape anyone. Got it? Okay, so this is protections for when this happens, right? For the people involved. If it does happen, I mean, and there's even other things where if a man raped a married woman, that man is supposed to be put to death, right? Because he's supposed to be killed, right? So these are ways of trying to prevent and also protect the people involved. So yes, they were not supposed to marry foreign women, right? But God knew that was going to happen. I like to think of Jesus where it talks about why then did Moses say you can allow divorce? And Jesus says, because of your hardness of hearts, right? This is not how things are supposed to go, right? But because people enact in their sin, right? Because people enact in their sin, this thing still happens. I mean, we talked about Bathsheba today. Gary mentioned it in the sermon. Like, David should have been put to death for that crime, right? Right? So, good?
But he married her.
He did. Afterwards, but that was before Nathan confronted him. So, any other questions? Mr. Tompkins?
Is that correct? Am I understanding this correct? The foreign women that were taken captive in battle had the same rights as the Israeli women did?
They couldn't be redeemed.
Okay,
So,
there's a difference.
yes, they did not have the redemption, but they had the same rights in the sense of you could not use them as sex slaves.
But the men can divorce them more easily than the Israeli women? Or?
No.
Okay.
Well, it depends on what time period we're talking about. At the time of Jesus, divorce was super easy. You just had to give her a ticket, right? And say, I'm divorcing you. But at this time, no, divorce, no matter what your wife, no matter if your wife was foreign born or not, divorce was not supposed to be enacted or done. Are we good? Yes.
Then you look at the bottom of the verse, it says, if you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes. So,
Yeah.
she could leave him?
She could, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so what this bottom part here is, you cannot sell her, right? She's not a slave, right? You can't just, marry her for a month and be like, I don't like you anymore, you go away. When it says, when it talks about, where it says let her go wherever she wishes, right? That's talking about how you can't just control, like, like, I don't want you, I'm going to sell you to my friend, right? Or something like that. If she wanted to go back to her land, she could, if you divorced her in that sense. And she would get the full rights of a woman who was divorced, right? Good? Garrett, oh no, this is scary.
I don't think it's scary. We have to realize, this is not 21st century Western world. It's a radically different society. Back in those days, women had no rights whatsoever in the world. You could do anything you want to. And when the Jews got involved, got a whole different paradigm for marriage, for women, for family, for everything, radically different than anything they'd ever seen before. And in a perfect world, they did the things that the law said to do. But when they failed, what was the system set up to protect these women from being just property? And these kinds of things were safeguards of grace that God gave to them. The women could not just be used and thrown away. And while it's not up to the standards of the New Testament and where we are today, this is massively different than anything the world has ever seen before.
Yes, very much so. This is completely and utterly foreign to all the other nations, right? And, I mean, as Gary pointed out, it's different from the New Testament in the sense it goes even further, right? Women get more rights. They have more protections. You're supposed to treat your wife even better than you were supposed to be back then. But, again, you have to remember, they did not have the Holy Spirit at the time, so they couldn't, they don't have that act of God in their life, right? Anyone else? I think we're out of time. Okay, we went a little bit over. Good discussion, though, today. So thank you for coming.